I'm Jo Tovey, and this is the Full Story Newsroom Edition, where we take you behind the news of the week. So, Newsroom Edition is back for 2026, and it's my first time hosting. With me to mark the occasion is Deputy Editor Gabrielle Jackson.
Hi, Jo. I'll try not to judge you too harshly.
Fingers crossed. And given the news this week, we also have The Guardian Australia's international editor, Bonnie Malkin, with us.
Hi, Jo and Gabs. I'm very honoured to be here.
So, on Saturday, Israel and the US launched a wave of strikes on Iran, assassinating the leader and kickstarting a chaotic war that is engulfing the region. Hundreds are dead, including at least 1,000 Iranians at the time of recording, and Iran has continued to retaliate against Israel and across the Gulf. Now, there's really too much to discuss today, but I want to break down just a few key aspects of this frenzied conflict, including Australia's response and what the media's role in it all is. Bonnie, I want to go to you. We're less than a week into this. Can you talk to us about how it's transformed in that very short time?
I can, yes. I mean, it seems incredible that we're only on day 6. This started on Saturday night for us in Australia. We got word that Israel had started bombing Tehran. And very quickly it became apparent that the US was involved, and that was later confirmed, obviously. I mean, any hope that it would be contained in a way has gone very quickly out of the window. Iran responded across the Gulf. As you said, Jo, I think about 9 countries have been bombed by Iran. And then we've seen Hezbollah enter the war as well. And now lots and lots of people evacuating from southern Lebanon as Israel responds. We also have issues in Europe. There was the drone that fell on a US base in Cyprus. We've gone from not just a regional conflict, but to something that's touching the borders of Europe and Asia. So it seems astounding that we're here now, and what's next is what everyone wants to know.
Is that part of Iran's strategy, though, to draw in not only the region but wider, like trying to draw NATO into the fight, do you think?
That's a good question. I think everyone's been surprised by the kind of robust response that Iran has given to the attack. And I think what's really interesting as well, and we should talk about at some point, is the kind of economic impact of Iran saying we're going to close the Strait of Hormuz. You know, obviously that's a kind of tactical move to try and drive up oil prices and scare America. So in terms of what exactly their strategy is, I'm not sure, but it's certainly one to watch.
It's really terrifying that they have started yet another war with no end plan or plan for the day after. The regime was incredibly unpopular in Iran among the Iranian population. The best estimates are that between 10 to 20% of the population supported the Islamic Republic. It's deeply unpopular. It's not hard to see why. It's a brutal, murderous regime that oppressed its people for decades and recently killed thousands, if not tens of thousands of its own people merely for protesting. So the scenes in Iran following the death of the Ayatollah were jubilant. People were very happy that this brutal, people have called him a monster, was dead. But of course, they're incredibly nervous about what comes next. Regime change isn't very easy. The Revolutionary Guards control the intelligence, the money, and the weapons. It's very hard to tear that apart and to find an opposition within a structure like that.
I want to talk a bit about how Australia and other countries have responded to this conflict so far. Gabs, how would you characterise the Australian response and how does it compare to, say, some of our allies in Europe?
So the Australian response was pretty swift in support for the strikes. The Prime Minister mentioned the nuclear issue and the threat to international peace and security that Iran posed. That's true. Iran did pose a threat to international peace and security, and they have not been good followers of international law themselves. I think for Australia, there were other factors at play. After the Bondi terror attack, the government was shown to be weak, and they did not want to be seen looking weak again, especially since Iran last year was found to be responsible for 2 anti-Semitic attacks in Australia, including the Adass Israel synagogue attack. So they really probably judged that they had to, support this attack. I think another thing on their mind was probably that the strikes were popular among the Iranian diaspora in Australia.
I think it's interesting, though, that Australia, there are other countries that have similarly supported the strikes, but they've done so with more obvious reluctance. So Mark Carney, Prime Minister of Canada, has also backed the strikes, but said they did so with some regret, and he acknowledged that they were likely illegal under international law. Keir Starmer has also voiced a lot more reticence than we've seen in Australia. What do you make of that, Bonnie?
Yeah, I think that this is kind of a very different war to previous wars that the US's allies in Europe and around the world have been involved in. I think at this point we're seeing that the allies really want to be involved only to the point of kind of defending their own bases in the region, their own citizens in the region, and their own land. I don't see them kind of rushing to the banner, although I must also acknowledge that it seems quite, the justification for this from the US seems quite unclear and shifting. So it would be very difficult.
Every day there's a different reason.
So it would be very difficult to kind of say, yes, we agree with the US, because in the next day or the next hour, the justification for this war could change. So I do feel that the allies in Europe and around the world are trying to keep a very small target in terms of how they want to be involved, what they want to achieve. And at the moment, it's really a very defensive position.
And they really didn't even try to get international support. That was what was so stark this time compared to every other war in a similar way that we've seen in the past. There was no building a coalition.
Yeah.
They just seemed to have done it.
It's like bomb now, ask questions later. In this instance, unlike before.
I think the discussions about international law have been one of the most interesting parts of this week. Experts largely agree, and some leaders have conceded this week that the US and Israel almost certainly broke international law with these strikes. But the Trump administration has really brushed aside the question of legality. Australian leaders have refused to be drawn on it. I guess I want to talk about to what extent he's right. And what the media's role is. My view is that he's right to the degree that there are people clearly breaching international law, left, right, and centre, and not being held accountable for it. That is self-evident. However, the question remains, is that the world we want to live in? I think absolutely not.
Yeah, I think you're right, Jo, when you say both things can be true. We live in a time where international law is regularly ignored. I mean, you can look at the Ukraine conflict, you can look at the war on Gaza. But does it mean that we don't need it and we shouldn't try to live in a world where it does matter? I mean, I think absolutely we want to live in that world. And I also think, it's worth having a discussion about, what are the alternatives to this, which is kind of fascinating and also terrifying. There
was a really interesting piece in the conversation this week that kind of argued why international law is important at times like this. And its basic premise was, yes, they have defied international law by this strike, but great powers have always defied international law. But we still have international laws that govern those rules of engagement, so to speak, and they use the bombing of the children's school as an example of, yes, this is a crime, but we should still have some rules about how we conduct that war. And bombing a children's school is clearly not within the bounds of any kind of international law.
Just on that point about that incident, Gabs, takes us to another interesting point, I think, about this conflict and journalism, which is how difficult and challenging it is to cover a conflict like this, as chaotic and frenzied as it is, in a difficult reporting environment. Bonnie, can you talk a bit about how we covered that incident, which is sort of information has leaked out quite slowly over time? How do we verify information quickly, remotely, and also in an era of AI where we're trusting things that we're seeing less than ever before?
In this case, I was actually talking to Tess McClure, who is the commissioning editor for all of our work on the school strike, and I think they've done some really powerful stuff from her team. She was saying that when it first started to emerge, there were some videos coming out, and there were lots of videos, and some of them kind of didn't really ring true, but there were 4 that all seemed to tell the same story and were shot from different angles, but it seemed to be the same place. And so they took those to the video and picture teams and asked them to help try and verify them and make sure that they weren't AI generated, because there are several tells when that happens. They became quite confident that those 4 videos were actually real and were showing what they purported to be showing. They used satellite imagery to kind of locate the school, because the Iranian authorities gave a location. They were able to actually see from the satellite imagery some of the murals in the school, so that all chimed. I should say that they did see some quite terrible pictures from the school that we obviously wouldn't publish, but it did prove that children had died there, primary school aged children. So as you can see, it's kind of a slow and forensic approach, and really we will only kind of move forward when we're 100% confident that from multiple sources are saying the same thing, and that we're seeing what we're seeing lines up.
I think that visual guide, Bonnie, that you're talking about, and anyone who hasn't seen it should please look it up. The thing that I loved about it was a point that you were making before, Jo, about media and our role. The thing I loved about that visual guide is that it kind of showed the media's working. That team was very clear to lay out how they had verified each video, why they had made the decisions that they had made. And it kind of leaves it up to the reader. It's like, this is the conclusion that we have reached with the information we have. And it also kind of fact-checked some of the other videos going around to deny that it was a US or Israeli attack, which I think in a time of declining trust in the media is more and more important.
How have we approached that question of attribution for the strike, like who is responsible?
Look, we still haven't got a confirmed answer. I know that a BBC journalist today asked Pete Hegseth, what the US was thinking about the strike, and Pete Hegseth said, we're investigating.
He didn't deny it.
He didn't deny it.
He didn't deny it, which is very telling.
Exactly. And also when the BBC reporter pressed him again and said, look, you've had several days to investigate, all he would say was, we're looking into it, which, in a way is quite telling. But, he also said we don't, as the US doesn't target civilian infrastructure. But, we just have to wait and see on that one, I think.
The other thing to say is just once a war starts, you can't really control who gets killed. And shouldn't we all be sad for the death of 100 children, no matter who did it?
Of course, yeah.
Now, it feels almost wrong to talk about this conflict too much through an Australian lens, given that its devastation, as we were just discussing, is largely being felt on the other side of the world. But there are some implications here that we can discuss. Gabs, is Labor at all under pressure here for their response to this war, either inside or outside the parliament?
It doesn't appear so, Jo. I don't know what you think about it, but the Labor Party, caucus has remained largely in line with their position. There is the Labor Against War coalition that would always come out against this, but I don't think that they really feel very threatened by that group of people. What's your impression, Jo?
Yeah, I think there's been a remarkable lack of dissent from the sort of established lines, and we are seeing just the same, literally kind of 3 or 4 lines over and over again. Bob Carr spoke out against it this week. But otherwise, within Labor, it's been almost non-existent, any even questioning or a willingness to call this an illegal war. The opposition has come, I guess it's a similar sort of coalition that we've seen speaking out on Gaza for years, which is, really the Greens and human rights groups within Australia, sort of civil society, international lawyers, the comment pages of The Guardian, for example. But really outside that, I think the response is either very supportive of the government, which you see, from the opposition. The front pages of the, Australian this week have been incredibly kind of bellicose in favour of this action. And the editorial line is too of, the majority of Australian kind of mainstream media.
It's interesting how they've ducked whether they think it's illegal or not, though, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think they're making the calculation that the Australian public is not going to punish them for this one way or another. I would say that with the caveat that as long as the economic fallout is contained, as with Gaza, which they were criticised heavily from, both the left for being too soft on Israel and from the right for being not supportive enough of Israel during the last parliamentary term. When we got to the election, it didn't seem to hurt Labor a jot. You know, that's the sort of sad reality, is that foreign affairs doesn't seem to factor politically into that kind of electoral calculus that a lot of Australians are making. And I'm guessing here that they think they can kind of ride this out.
Yeah.
One thing I think we do need to watch, as you said, Jo, is the economy. You know, we're in a bit of a precarious moment with the Reserve Bank thinking about putting up interest rates, and with oil, the price of oil goes up, then we're into a bit of a spiral that is not good news for the Labour Party or anybody.
Yeah, I agree. That's probably their biggest threat, and it was very interesting to see both Chris Bowen and Jim Chalmers telling people not to panic buy. I feel like that, if they keep saying it, it might be like telling someone not to look, but that's where they're headed. I think they can see that that's their biggest risk. You know, Chalmers was already planning on a budget that had some spending restraint in it, and there was some semi-good news about the economy this week. It will be interesting to see if this changes their calculation.
And how do you think this is playing out in terms of public opinion in the US, Bonnie?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. We're in early days, obviously, but I don't think Trump has seen a big kind of bounce for this war. You know, I don't think it's super popular, or people are kind of, you know, I think people talk about getting a sugar rush, you know, at the beginning of a war that lifts politicians in the polls. That's not happening. I think it's a very much kind of, it feels like something that the MAGA Republicans said that they wouldn't do. And I think people who voted for Trump might be asking, why is this happening? What does this have to do with America? And I guess the closer we get to the midterms, especially if there is, you know, we see strong oil price rises, then it might start to get a little bit more uncomfortable for Trump, and we might see some kind of resolution maybe from, you know, the US deciding that it's gone far enough.
So now I'd like to steer us through a real change of tone as we move to a segment called What We Can't Get Out of Our Heads, which is the stories and cultural phenomena that have really kind of lodged themselves in our brain this week. Gabs, what was it for you?
Well, it's what I'm trying to put in my head rather than what I can't get out of my head, Jo, because the world is in such a terrible state that I've been watching How to Get to Heaven from Belfast. I don't even...
Me too.
Is that the
so
title?
good.
Did I get it right?
Yes.
Anyway, it's absolutely delightful. It is so funny, so surprising. It's the writer from Dairy Girls, so it's really very, very funny. But it's just joyful, and it just got me thinking about how in COVID, you know, Ted Lasso and all these like very kind, funny shows were what we all went to for comfort. And I feel like, yeah.
Are you watching, Bonnie? I'm not.
I'm watching it. And I also think, not to get too serious about it, but one of the central parts of it is about female friendship and female friendship as an adult, not as a teenager or a young adult, really as a kind of grown up. That's, I mean, I agree, Gabs, it's just so joyful, so funny, brilliantly scripted, gorgeous production. And really makes you feel like you're just injecting joy into your life.
Yeah.
Okay, one to watch.
Yes.
Bonnie, what was it for you?
Mine is actually kind of from the other end of the spectrum. Mine is Wuthering Heights, and I can't get it out of my head because it's so bad. I feel like I will never get that 2.5 hours back. And I just want to know what the point was. And also an amazing achievement, really, that you could make a film with characters that were so uninteresting and felt so kind of dead inside.
Oh, God.
How do you make Kathy and Heathcliff uninteresting?
Well, I would say watch it, but don't watch it. It's not worth your time. And I still kind of shudder internally when I think of it.
I instinctively wanted to, I haven't seen it yet, but I instinctively wanted to like this movie because I was so annoyed at so much of the commentary that was like, oh, it's unfaithful to the book. Well, who cares? It's a 300-year-old book. If it's unfaithful, good. Like, let's do something different.
It's just not a good movie.
Right.
It feels like it's fake and there's no heart to it. Like, of course.
Which is weird because it seems so sort of sexy and pornified in a way.
Yeah, but it's almost like to the point of it feeling so blank.
Well, I did see that it was the perfect movie for the TikTok generation. So, maybe that's...
Maybe I'm too old.
maybe your
Fair
attention
enough.
span is too great.
It's too long.
Bonnie.
That's right, Gabs.
I just finished reading Wuthering Heights, and I was surprised at the casting for, the well-canvassed reasons around race, which they've just ignored, but also age. And as a woman of Margot Robbie's generation, I'm, glad to see women over 35 in, starring roles, but playing teenagers, I don't know.
And 2 kids from Queensland playing Yorkshire.
Catho and Heathcliff, as Beck Shaw said, I think.
What was it for you, Jo?
So my thing I couldn't get out of my head this week was Bad Bunny's first Sydney show, which I went to on Saturday, and buying that ticket I think was one of the best decisions I've ever made. We had a brilliant piece in The Guardian this week by Jack Tregoning summing up just how kind of rapturous it was. It was at a stadium in Homebush. I think almost every member of Sydney's Latin diaspora was there. Everybody was dancing. Everybody was in such a good mood. I mean, he is such an incredible performer, as, fans of his have known for a long time, and as the world learned, the rest of the world learned at the Super Bowl. It felt like just one of those moments of kind of connection with the crowd, and knowing that this is an ephemeral thing that you either had to be there or you weren't, and it's something you can kind of hold with you for the rest of your life, really. The concert started a couple of hours before the conflict we've just been discussing today kicked off, and Bad Bunny just feels like a sort of antidote to Trump, such an internationalist, so much about sort of joy and love and courage. It was really remarkable.
He's really tapping into very different genres. My 50-year-old partner has started to learn Bad Bunny lyrics, and he's rapping them to me in Spanish regularly. And I tell you what, it does make me laugh.
I love that. All right. Well, we might leave it there. Thank you very much for joining me on this first foray back. Thank you, Gabs.
Thank you so much, Jo.
And thank you, Bonnie.
It's a pleasure. Thanks, Jo.